Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services virtual public information meeting for the Red Wolf Recovery Program updates. We're going to give folks a few minutes here to join the meeting, and then we'll begin the PowerPoint presentation shortly, so please stay tuned. I do want to note that closed captioning is available by selecting the closed caption icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you are using the Zoom web portal or Zoom app on your computer. Again, welcome everyone to tonight's meeting. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to join the webinar, so please stay tuned and we'll start the presentation shortly. Again, I do want to note that closed captioning is available by selecting the closed caption icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you are using the Zoom web portal or Zoom app on your computer. Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our meeting tonight. I would like to thank you all for joining us. We appreciate your time and participation. My name is Megan Stone with Environmental Management and Planning Solutions, Inc., a contractor for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm going to be one of your meeting facilitators tonight. Additionally, I have several members of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with me on the meeting today who will be introduced in a moment. So on the screen, you can see our expected agenda for the evening. I'll first go over some brief ground rules for today's meeting. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will provide a PowerPoint presentation on the Red Wolf Management Program updates. Then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will hold a question and answer session to respond to participants' questions. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will then provide closing remarks and will close out the meeting around 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Next slide, please. Before we get started with the presentation, I'm going to go over some ground rules for the meeting. First, this meeting is being recorded as part of the project record, and a recording will be posted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website. Second, your microphones and videos will be turned off for the duration of the meeting tonight. We will unmute you only if needed during the question and answer session. Questions will be addressed during the question and answer session after the PowerPoint presentation. As of right now, we're going to first go through our list of questions that were submitted upon registration that are within the scope and ability of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to respond to at this time. If we have time remaining on the meeting after we have responded to those questions, we will open up the chat feature to allow participants to submit follow-up questions on the service's responses. We will do our best to address the questions in the order they come in to allow everyone an opportunity to voice their questions tonight. If you would like to ask a question at any point, you can type your question in the Zoom chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John Turpak, who's the Deputy Assistant Regional Director, and he's going to do some introductions.
All right, thank you, Megan, and good evening, everybody. My name is John Turpak. I'm the Deputy Assistant Regional Director for Ecological Services here in the Southeast region. On behalf of the entire U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I welcome you to this virtual public information meeting on red wolf recovery. It's exciting to see so many people online. I know at last count, we had more than 200 folks that had registered, and we already have more than 100 online here. We have representation from not only around the country, but even around the world, as a number of international participants have joined us. And so welcome all. Today, we'll talk about some recent developments in the Red Wolf program and some of the work ahead. What we've achieved to date and what we may realize in the future comes not only from the hard work of the team that you will hear from tonight, but also for many of you that have joined us online and have directly and indirectly supported these efforts. Notably, I hope we all recognize the many private landowners in Eastern North Carolina, many of whom are hosting red wolves on their lands, despite never asking for them. If not for the tolerance and contributions, red wolves would not have a place to be red wolves, and recovery would not be possible. So thank you to you all. Before I turn it over to Emily and team, I just want to remind everybody that recovery of a species, particularly a large carnivore, is a long game. I'm encouraged by recent developments, but that is tempered with the knowledge that there will be setbacks. But know this, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is in it for the long haul, and we want and need you to be there with us. Again, I appreciate the interest of everyone in red wolf recovery, as evidenced by the turnout tonight. But I also recognize that everyone includes many different perspectives. Regardless of your opinion, we must hear it, for only by working together can we collectively realize success. With that, let's start by introducing the Red Wolf Recovery Program team. Next slide. First, we have Emily Weller, our Red Wolf Recovery Program Coordinator, actually not on the slide there, but Emily, if you put your camera on, kind of give a wave to everybody. There you go. We also have Joe Madison, the North Carolina Program Manager for the Red Wolf Program. We have Ryan Nordston and Morgan Lewis, both wildlife biologists with the Red Wolf Recovery Program, and Luke Lawless, our private lands biologist. And with that, Emily, I'll turn it over to you to get us all started.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be here with you this evening. I thought that I would just start out this presentation with some information on the recovery program as a whole, the broad Red Wolf Recovery Program, before I pass it on to Joe, who will cover what's been going on in North Carolina. Let's see, yeah, you're on the right slide. Thank you. When we were putting this presentation together, we really structured it around the questions that we get frequently, whether that's on the ground, in meetings, media questions, and then of course the questions that were submitted in preparation for the in-person meeting last night and this meeting tonight. So to get started, the mission of the Red Wolf Recovery Program is to work with others to conserve, protect, and enhance the endangered red wolf. The key words there really are work with others. The service is committed, like John said, to recovering the red wolf, and we're committed to working collaboratively to get there. It's the only way to be successful. We want to move beyond the litigation and establish a broader connection to the community and the needs of the community. And that's not just in North Carolina, but anywhere red wolf populations will be. So the key components of the Red Wolf Recovery Program are done so under this umbrella of collaborative conservation. And those four key components, when working together, give the red wolf the best chance of recovery. Those components are the captive population, wild populations, communications, and research. And then I added under this umbrella the recovery plan, as it touches on each of these areas. It's a collaborative effort, and it's a product that we currently have in the works. Next slide, please. So as you may know, in 2021, we convened a new recovery team comprised of 51 members. That includes representatives from seven state wildlife agencies, including the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, researchers, private citizens, wildlife biologists, natural resource managers, zoo biologists, and others. And that team is tasked with updating the Red Wolf Recovery Plan. Just in the interest of time, I'll go through the general strategy, the recovery strategy that's outlined in the recovery plan. For all the details, you can obtain a copy of that draft recovery plan at a couple of the services websites, or you can request it by mail or email. The first part of the strategy is to expand distribution of the species. That's establishing additional populations in areas of adequate habitat that are ideally different habitat that will support multiple packs. At this time, we don't have additional population locations identified, but a population viability analysis is currently being developed by the recovery team that will provide insights into population characteristics of a viable population, and that'll help us identify sites that could potentially support a viable red wolf population. The second part of the strategy is to increase the population abundance and maintain genetic diversity long-term. To do that, we need a robust captive population to support releases and pup fostering and maintain gene diversity long-term. Establishing and growing populations will also likely require translocation of wild red wolves within and among wild populations, and then propagation sites, and then adaptive management. For red wolf populations to ultimately be viable or successful, they must not be reliant on extensive human interventions, which we define as annual or frequent releases, fostering, translocations, and placeholder management. To further increase population numbers, maintain genetic diversity, and eliminate the need for those extensive human interventions, threats to the red wolf, both the captive and wild, must be adequately addressed to ensure survival, growth, and long-term viability. And then the third part of the strategy, implementing collaborative conservation. This was a major focus of the recovery team. For any species, but particularly this one, effective recovery will require participation and involvement of all parties. That's state agencies, other federal agencies, private landowners, local communities, local governments, tribal governments, NGOs, and academia. Cooperation among all of those stakeholders will be critical in minimizing threats to a level that will allow the species to persist without those extensive human interventions, and critical to ensuring those management actions and recovery strategies have social acceptance and support. Stakeholder engagement will require establishing trust and building a true partnership, which includes having a shared understanding among all parties regarding their goals, objectives, roles, responsibilities, and expectations. Next slide, please. In September 2022, we put the draft revised recovery plan out for public review and comment for 30 days. During the comment period, we received comments asserting that the criteria and actions were not sufficiently detailed and should be revised to include more measurable metrics based on the upcoming final PVA, the population viability analysis. So in light of those comments, we decided to seek an extension so that we can incorporate those results of the PVA into the final recovery plan. The recovery team has been working since February on the development of that PVA model, and we're expecting that to be complete at the beginning of June. At that time, the team will then use the PVA to update the recovery plan, the recovery criteria, and the recovery actions. The new due date for the final recovery plan is September 29th, 2023. Now, once the team has completed work on the recovery plan, it'll begin working on the recovery implementation strategy. This document will include the step-down activities needed to carry out and implement the actions identified in the recovery plan. This is the playbook that all partners, stakeholders can pull from. I'll look at this document as a means to spark more collaborative efforts, reduce redundancy or inefficiencies, and really focus us on those activities that will have the greatest impact in moving us towards recovery. This document is flexible. It can be modified at any time to incorporate new information or adapt to changing circumstances on the ground. But that is not the final step in recovery. The recovery plan and the recovery implementation strategy are overarching guidance documents. The recovery plan outlines what recovery looks like for the species through the criteria, and then provides the broad actions that are needed to reach those criteria. The implementation strategy steps down those actions into the on-the-ground activities that are needed to carry out those actions. Both of these are developed by the recovery team, but recovery goes beyond the recovery team. Planning and carrying out those recovery efforts, those step down activities, will be a collaborative effort with the greater group of stakeholders. A process to engage the community, other agencies, NGOs, other stakeholders, to give those affected by decisions a say in those decisions. And that'll be put in place for not only the population in North Carolina, but any other red wolf population. Next slide, please. The captive population of red wolves is an essential component of the red wolf recovery. It's the foundation. Without it, we would not have had red wolves to start a population in the wild or red wolves to establish new populations. Releases and fostering from the captive population helped the Eastern North Carolina red wolf population reach a peak of 120 animals in 2012, and they are the current source of red wolves for efforts to create new red wolf breeding pairs. Captive population is overseen by the Association of Zoo and Aquarium's Red Wolf SAFE program, that's Saving Animals from Extinction. It's formerly known as the Species Survival Program, or SSP, as you've probably heard us refer to it before. The goal of the SAFE program is to support conservation efforts for the species by maintaining a healthy and viable population of red wolves under human care, growing education and awareness efforts, aiding research vital to supporting recovery, and working to support in situ conservation. And they are setting up subcommittees to support that goal. I know there's a husbandry subcommittee, population management, education, research subcommittees, and I believe there may be a couple of others that are in the works. There are approximately 278 red wolves in 49 safe facilities across the country. That includes 43 puppies among 15 litters this year. This is the highest the population has ever been in program history. With the captive population being the foundation of recovery, maintaining a population suitable for release is critical. That's having genetically, demographically, and behaviorally appropriate red wolves. And in having a population suitable for release, we increase success of releases. So we are working with SAFE and other partners to ensure that we meet that standard. First, we need to increase the captive population. As I said before, a robust captive population is needed to not only maintain genetic diversity, but support growth and establishment of wild populations through releases and fostering without negatively affecting the captive population. One of the highest priorities for the program is increasing space capacity so that breeding capability can increase and thus the population increases. The current goal is 330 red wolves in the safe population. It was estimated that 50 new enclosures are needed to accommodate that growth. In the last few years, 36 of those 50 needed enclosures have been funded or constructed. And we are already seeing the impacts or the progress that that growth has provided with this milestone, the highest population in safe history that they just reached. The Service and Safe program will also be working on a controlled propagation plan per the service's controlled propagation policy. The captive population has been managed well, maintaining 12 lineages and maintaining genetic diversity. A controlled propagation plan will just assist in optimizing reproduction, reducing mortality, and sustaining a healthy population long-term. We're also working together on a husbandry assessment. The service coordinates regularly with the SAFE program to evaluate and select red wolves for release into the wild based on their genetic makeup, reproductive performance, behavior, and physical suitability. And while human contact is minimized, there have been some behavioral issues that have made successful releases challenging. This has been true not only for red wolves, but also Mexican wolves. So both programs, the Red Wolf and Mexican Wolf programs, the Service and Safe programs, we're all working together to develop an evaluation of husbandry practices to determine if there are changes that can or need to be made to address those behavioral issues that have been experienced by both species. And we're also working on an assessment to better evaluate potential release candidates. Excuse me. We are also currently working with partners to identify and establish a pre-release site. A pre-release site is a larger enclosed area 5, 10, 20 acres, with human or vehicle interactions minimized to very little, if any. They're fed whole prey and they're held for a greater length of time or until a certain predetermined criteria are met. This is to help us better prepare these red wolves for life in the wild. I just want to note that the institutions that are part of the SAFE program bring resources and expertise that go beyond breeding. They are particularly experienced with education programs and outreach to the community. They're often the first source of information or awareness for the public and are a trusted messenger of wildlife conservation and environmental issues. Many of these institutions are also conducting vital research to improve the health of the captive population. Next slide, please. Our next key component, the wild populations. Currently, there is one wild red wolf population. We continue to manage and grow that population, which Joe will speak to, and he'll cover some of the changes and adaptations that have been made and other actions we're taking that are different than maybe the years past. With only one population, we know that other populations are needed for species viability or recovery. We have not yet identified any potential sites for future red wolf populations. That is a process that requires extensive upfront coordination with potential partners. However, it is one of the high priority recovery actions listed in the draft recovery plan. Information on identifying sites will come from several places. First, the forthcoming PVA will provide insight into parameters for a viable population. That information will help us identify sites that could potentially support a viable red wolf population. Information from the PVA will be combined with various suitability studies that are available in literature and information within the recovery plan that'll be used as the basis of an evaluation of potential sites. However, the establishment of a red wolf population must be a collaborative effort between the service, state agencies, county governments, local governments, tribal governments, and other federal agencies, private landowners, and the community at large. We cannot name specific sites without first taking time to have those crucial conversations early in the process, ensure a shared vision for potential reintroductions, and begin those collaborative efforts that will be vital to successful reintroductions. Now, whether it's growing a population or establishing new populations, the path forward will focus on collaboration and community and partner engagement. What that looks like will probably vary between populations, but the recovery plan outlines actions that will support that. First, one of the recovery actions is organizing interagency management teams that service state, county, local, tribal governments, and other federal agencies to jointly manage recovery of red wolves. Another recovery action is increased stakeholder involvement in management and recovery planning processes. And then another is developing population-specific adaptive reintroductions with the interagency management teams and the stakeholders. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Our next key component, communications, is just as important as the biological components. We can't move beyond litigation and connect to the needs of the community without proper communication. We can't follow through with focusing on community and partner engagement and increasing transparency without proper communication. It's key to building the trust and relationships needed for program success and recovery of the species. Now, communications covers a pretty wide spread. We have media, interviews, filming that Joe does a lot of, various social media. We have our website. There's outreach and educational programs at the Red Wolf Center, which are being expanded actually with the North Carolina Wildlife Federation and the National Wildlife Refuge Association. There's educational programs in schools, at safe facilities, teacher ambassador program, which Joe will talk about. All of these are to improve awareness and tolerance of red wolves. Communications also includes various materials like virtual and print brochures, fact sheets, hunter ID cards. There are several documentaries that have been made over the years about various aspects of red wolves or the recovery program. One that's coming up later this year is one in which the service partnered with the Cherokee Nation. It focuses on the cultural importance of the red wolf to the Cherokee people. The tribal perspective has been missing from the red wolf story, and it needs to be incorporated into its recovery. And this is one of those first steps. These meetings, the in-person and the virtual public information meetings, quarterly partnership coordination calls, annual safe planning meetings, phone calls. The field team takes phone calls day and night. I answer hotline calls day and night. I carry the hotline phone. I get calls from all over. But most of these are more one-way communications. It's a way for us to get information out there. These meetings are one directional. It's meant for us to provide you with updates on what's going on, to answer your questions and concerns. We haven't really set it up as like a two-way street to get feedback or input, but we want to change that. Like I've said, community and stakeholder involvement is a major focal point of the recovery plan. It calls for increased formal participation of all stakeholders in management and recovery planning processes at each site. That's two-way communication. What that looks like, we don't know. We need input from the community. And one of the ways that we're getting help with that, the service has contracted the services of Francine Madden of Conservation Conflict LLC. She is helping us with conflict transformation, taking conflict and transforming that energy from something that's destructive to collaboration and progress. And so while we have hired her, she does not work for us. She works for everyone, the vast group of Red Wolf stakeholders. So one of the things she will be helping us with is developing a process or multiple processes with and by stakeholders to ID what they want to have a say in, and then engage stakeholders to give those that are affected by the decisions a say in the decisions. Next slide, please. And last but not least, research. Good science is needed to inform our decision-making and management. The service and our partners are helping to ensure we have that good science. Arkansas State University is the repository for all red wolf samples and specimens. This ensures proper preparation, preservation, cataloging of samples and specimens for future research and educational purposes. Over the last several years, study has been conducted to determine if red wolf ancestry still persists in wild canids in Southwest Louisiana and Southeast Texas, where the last of the red wolves were captured to start the captive breeding program in the 70s. These studies have found that substantial red wolf ancestry persists in wild canids in this area. The information collected during these efforts will be used to determine taxonomy of those canids with comprehensive genetic and morphological analyses. Field work and data collection and analysis for these studies, it continues. Another study is developing ancestry informative markers to differentiate and measure hybridization among all North American canid species. And additionally, we have several partners conducting research to improve health, care, management of our captive red wolves, including studies on inflammatory bowel disease, assisted reproductive technologies, and an inherited form of blindness. And we anticipate additional research needs will be identified through the recovery planning process. So to kind of finish out my portion here, we can't do this on our own. To be successful, we have to work with others to conserve, protect, and enhance the endangered red wolf. And with that, I will pass it on over to Joe.
Thanks, Emily. You can go to the next slide. Again, my name is Joe Madison. I'm the program manager here in North Carolina, and I will update you on the current status of the red wolves here in North Carolina and all the various parts and pieces that are going into our current management here. Next slide. Just want to remind folks that we're currently continuing to operate under the 10J rule that was last updated in 1995 in conjunction with applicable court decisions. And one of those being the last one in January 2021, where the U.S. District Court issued a ruling that the Fish and Wildlife Service needed to draft a plan to release captive red wolves back into North Carolina. Subsequent to that ruling, the Fish and Wildlife Service has submitted and implemented phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 release plans that covered March 2021 through May 2023. And phase 3 is what we are currently in right now in the middle of, and what we'll talk a lot about tonight, and is what I presented and talked about last fall at that previous meeting. Next slide. As part of that, we've hosted three sets of public meetings, both in person and virtual, locally over the past 15 months. And those were designed to increase interaction with stakeholders regarding the red wolf recovery plan that Emily talked about, upcoming releases, coyote management in the Albemarle Peninsula, Pray for the Pack, which Luke Lawless, the private lands biologist, will talk about in a little bit, and just generally increase community engagement. For this meeting in particular, we've contacted over 120 landowners and local stakeholders directly via phone calls and emails and texts, and posted over 60 flyers throughout this entire 5-county area to really get as much participation and folks involved in these meetings as much as we can, because as we've talked about, the more interaction we have with folks, the better for all concerned, as well as we've posted it on numerous community websites throughout the area. Next slide. There's currently 15 known, and by known I mean radio collared adult and subadult red wolves that we can track at any given point out there in the wild. And there's also 6 pups, which are from we'll talk about later, but that they're too young to be collared. So the known population currently, as we sit right now, is 15 adult and subadult red wolves. All of those known adult and subadult red wolves has orange collars, which I'll also talk about a bit more, 8 of which are also GPS collars. So they're all VHF collars that we can track from the ground and from the air when we're able to get flights. But 8 of them have GPS collars that send us signals based on a set schedule that we can alter without having the animal in hand. Oftentimes people think the GPS collars give us real-time data of where these red wolves are, but that's not the case. We just get a set transmission every day or every 2 days, whatever we have it set to, and I'll talk about that a little bit more with the releases. The estimated total wild population right now is 23 to 25 animals, and that takes into account pups, but also potentially red wolves with non-functioning radio collars, or areas where we think we might potentially have a red wolf based on sightings or remote camera footage or those types of things. I'll also note that the population, the known population when we talked last in October was 10. So there has been an increase in that number since that time. Next slide. There's been 3 mortalities in the wild since the last public meeting in fall 2022. All 3 of those were older red wolves. One of them was natural causes, a 13-year-old female, and 2 are currently unknown. One, we're never going to be able to determine the cause of death because the carcass was too far gone by the time we located it. And one, the necropsy results are currently pending, but he was known to have some health issues. And I noticed the question came in that if we known he had health issues, why didn't we go out and capture him and bring him in for vet care? But that's a difficult prospect to do. It's not as easy to go out and do that, especially with these free-roaming wild animals. And life is hard being a wild animal, and these are very resilient animals. So a lot of times, even if we know that they might potentially have an issue, they're still going to be out there surviving and doing what they do as a wild animal. And again, he was an older male. Next slide. In addition to the SAFE program that Emily talked about, the St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge is a key component of the red wolf recovery program, and that is it's a red wolf island propagation site off the Gulf Coast of Florida that was established in 1990. And the intent of this island is about 12,000 acres, is to have an established red wolf breeding pair there in the wild. And when they have litters in the wild that are born there and grow up and raised, but they're in a somewhat controlled environment, meaning there's no paved roads, there's no one that lives there, there's limited hunting and those types of things. So They grow up learning how to be wild and fend for themselves without some of the potential dangers of mainland. But when those young reach dispersal age, the intent is to capture them and translocate them up into the eastern North Carolina red wolf population here in eastern North Carolina. Currently there is one pair of red wolves on St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge. Some monitoring indicates that they may have had a litter this spring, but it has not yet been confirmed. But St. Vincent does factor into part of the release plan for this year. Next slide. On April 20th of this year, we confirmed that the Milltail pack on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge had a litter for the second year. It was comprised of 3 females and 2 males. They all seemed healthy. And I want to comment too, when we go to these den checks, we're there a very short amount of time. We go in, we take general health, take the sex of them, and we microchip them for future identification. And then we put them back in the wild den and we leave so that the mother can return as quickly as possible. So the pups are with us for as short of time as possible when we do this, 20 minutes, it probably tops. All of these pups look healthy. It was about day 9 when we were there. They were estimated to be born on April 11th. Again, we took genetic sample, general health check, and microchip them. And then when these pups next January, when they're large enough to be collared, we will attempt to capture and collar them. Next slide. Now, regarding our management actions for this previous fall, winter, and spring, and when in development of the phase 3 of the release plan, we're always constantly evaluating research and results from our past management actions and our experience regarding releases and the factors that seem to lead to a higher likelihood of success, talking to others, other programs, those types of things, and always trying to incorporate that when we do that. And for the releases, we'd look at evaluating places on National Wildlife Refuge that have adequate habitat security, but also provide sufficient prey for them to survive in the wild. Next slide. The red wolves selected for release are individually evaluated for their likelihood of success. There's a lot of factors that go into it, like age. We try to get 2 to 4 years old from enclosures that are off public view, fed natural prey items, and that they won't negatively impact the genetic makeup of the captive population, and are also good genetic matches for the red wolves that are in the wild. One factor that potentially increases the chances that pairs will remain together after release is the presence of pups. So in the past, we've released pairs, particularly new pairs, when the female was in heat, because there's been some evidence that would make them more likely to stay together because it's during the mating season. But we've looked at some other factors. We talked to the programs, specifically the Mexican wolf program, and they've had some success with leaving animals in pens longer and allowing them to potentially have pups in a pen, and it seemed to bond the pair even more tightly and potentially stay more in the area where they're released. So that was factored into the release plan this year as well. All of these release plans and management activities are discussed with the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission. We have several monthly collaboration meetings that help both agencies stay on track with what we're doing and in tune, and they're in tune with what we're doing, and we're aware of their gated management activities in this area, and we're collaborating on all the things we got going on. Next slide. So I'm gonna go through the goals of the plan and kind of where we're at on the various goals, the goals of the phase 3 release plan. So the first one was to focus on pup fostering opportunities whenever possible, because pup fostering is seen as one of the best ways to increase the genetic diversity and the numbers of the wild population. So in looking at that, and the Milltail litter, on April 24th, we fostered a male pup born at Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium in Tacoma into the wild litter on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. Since she already had 5 pups from this litter, and there were still 5 yearlings in the area from last year, we felt comfortable adding an additional pup, especially since she's a proven mother that showed that she could do well raising pups. So we fostered in one pup. Monitoring since we fostered him in, it suggests that the fostering was successful. but we don't go back in once we put this pup into the wild litter. We won't know the results until much later on. We have remote cameras set up, but not right near the den because we don't want to disturb or potentially cause abandonment of the pups. Closest camera is probably quarter to a half mile away. But the general survival of pups is about 50%, whether they're wild born or fostered. So we'll know over the coming months the success of that litter and the success of the fostering. Next slide. Another goal of the phase 3 release plan was to increase the number of breeding pairs in the eastern North Carolina red wolf population. One of those reasons being so that we can switch back to focusing more on pup fostering as a way to enhance the population rather than the release of adult animals, which is a difficult process, as we've already talked about some tonight. And one of the keys in doing that was to translocate a wild female red wolf from St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge to eastern North Carolina. So in November 22, we captured that female on Alligator River, on St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge, and translocated her here to North Carolina. And she was placed in an acclimation pen on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge with a captive born male that came from the North Carolina Zoo. This is a picture of them in their acclimation pen, which is, I'll have a slide that shows a bit more, but on this slide, take note that you can see the reflective material that's on the collar, how the infrared of the camera lights up that infrared. Of course, when it's, headlights, that shows up as a bright orange. And we'll talk about that a bit as well in a minute. Next slide. Again, increasing number of breeding pairs is a key focus, and apart from bringing a female from St. Vincent, we had 2 wild females. Well, we had more than 2. We have some wild females out there that were not paired with wild males. So the intent was to capture some of the females in the wild and place them in an acclimation pen with captive born males and attempt to create those new breeding pairs. There's evidence to suggest that when you've got a wild red wolf and you can pair them with a captive born red wolf, they're more like, and if they stay together, that captive born one is more likely to be successful in the wild, because the wild one, especially within their territory, can kind of show them the ropes and help them with that transition to life in the wild. So in November 2022, and again in February 2023, 2 of the wild females out on the landscape were captured, and they were both placed in acclimation pens within their territories with captive born males. One of those males came from the Endangered Wolf Center, and one of those males came from Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium. Next slide. One of the final goals of the release plan was to release a family group of 3 captive born red wolves on either Alligator River or Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, 2 adults and an offspring. And in December 2022, we placed the captive born family that came from the SAFE program, the Endangered Wolf Center, into an acclimation pen on Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. Next slide. Okay, so a big part of this is, the kind of the chronological of how this works is once we set those goals and to be able to get to where we are, we have to construct these acclimation pens, and these acclimation pens consist of these large chain link panels that we basically erector set together to create a enclosure that will hold them for several months without concern of escapes and release. There's a electrified line around the inside of the bottom to keep them from digging out. And then the white fencing you see on the outside is to protect it from bears being drawn to the food and climbing over the fence. These acclimation pens have been a pretty effective way of having them. They're placed in remote areas. We only go to these once a week. One person once a week goes to these to feed, give water, and collect the camera cards, because we have remote sensing cameras there to monitor their behavior. They're fed entirely natural prey diets of white-tailed deer, rabbits, nutria, things like that. Next slide. We collared all captive born red wolves with orange GPS VHF collars, and again they have the orange reflective material. So all of the newly released animals and their wild counterparts that were in the pens with them all have GPS collars on. to identify them as a red wolf, and we'll talk about that as well. The pups are too small to be collared, of course, but and that's when they're most vulnerable to being mistaken for a coyote. But as soon as they're large enough, then we capture and collar them as well. Next slide. From November through March, we conducted trapping on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge and Pocosa Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, as well as private land where we had landowner permission. During that time, we captured 21 wild canids, 8 red wolves, 12 coyotes, and 1 hybrid. The hybrid was euthanized as part of the current strategy on hybridization. And those captures and collaring also included the initial collaring of all 5 of the remaining red wolves born on Alligator River last spring. So they are all collared and counted in the known population now that they're collared. Next slide. Again, I've mentioned a couple of times, but all red wolves will continue to be fitted with these bright orange collars. That's to identify them as separate from coyotes and identify them as a red wolf, which is federally protected under the Endangered Species Act, which means that they are legal to kill or harm. And the reflective material can help with that too, but they don't all have the reflective material because that process was started later. So not all orange colored wolves have orange reflective material. So that in itself is not a good key as to whether it's a red wolf or not. You need to look for the orange. And if you see orange of any sort, then it's a federally protected species and don't shoot. And we will continue the outreach on what the orange collar means. One of the reasons orange was selected is because it's a hunter safety color. So it should be naturally ingrained in all hunters and the public in general that orange is a safety color and not to shoot. So we will continue those outreach efforts. Next slide. We also have 6 electronic mobile highway signs that we place closest to on the major roads closest to release sites. And we also move these signs around as we monitor red wolf use based on where we know they're in close proximity to roads. We currently have 6 signs that were purchased between Fish and Wildlife Service purchased some, the North Carolina Wildlife Federation purchased some, and the Red Wolf Coalition purchased some. But these and the reflective material also seems to have had an impact on reducing the vehicle strike mortalities. It doesn't necessarily eliminate it, but there has been anecdotal evidence, and it is very visible. So folks are seeing them, been able to see them, and be more likely to stop with that as a way to reduce the vehicle strike mortalities. But these signs, they've gone a lot further than just warning motorists about potential red wolf crossings. There's been communities that have told us that, they've raised their awareness of red wolves, that they were even there, that they, folks that didn't realize they were anywhere but on the refuge. And so the signs have been surprisingly good at community engagement, which wasn't their original intent, but obviously is a welcome use of the signs. We're also continuing to work with several entities. The Department of Transportation, we have a red wolf ecology study going on to look at ways to reduce vehicle strike mortalities. And we've talked about things such as crossings and fences. We're working with engineer students at North Carolina State University to look at ways to maybe advancement on collars that could have brighter lights that come on when they're in close proximity to highways or those types of things. So, vehicle strike mortalities is the second leading cause of mortality since reintroduction, and it can be even a little bit higher on the list of mortality causes for newly released red wolves. So we're looking into a variety of ways to continue to try to reduce that vehicle strike mortality. Next slide. When red wolves are known to be spending time on private land, we contact the landowners to notify them that there are red wolves on their property and to address any concerns they have up front. This is a key thing for us. This is something we switched a year or two ago because we want to be upfront and open with the folks, and we want to try to address their concerns and to let them know that they're there, so they're less likely to, for misidentification or think it's a coyote or to shoot, knowing that there's a red wolf on their property. So we can't necessarily call every landowner that a red wolf runs through their property, but if we, through our monitoring, have believe that they're spending any amount of time there, then we go out of our way to contact every landowner. And we encourage folks to contact us at any time with questions or concerns. And next slide. As Emily mentioned, there's a Red Wolf hotline, and there's the number for it. We respond to that, and we respond to calls, texts, emails with questions, sightings, potential issues. All of us do, and a lot of the folks we deal with have a certain biologist or someone that they want to talk to, which is fine. Or however you feel comfortable getting in contact with us, please do with any concerns, questions, and sightings, those types of things. We address time-sensitive issues 24/7 whenever humanly possible, and most of the time we are able to do that despite the relatively small crew we've got covering this area. And this picture is just an example of someone that had a red wolf hanging close to their property. They were concerned about their chickens, so we temporarily loaned one of the electrified bear fencing to help appease their concerns until that, and we hazed that animal out of there and until they left the area. So we can't necessarily always do that, but it's just an example of how we're trying to work closely with the community to engage and be responsive to red wolf needs and concerns. Next slide. Some status updates on the acclimation pens. So we have 4 acclimation pens. We have 3 on Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge and 2 on Alligator River. 3 on Pocosin Lakes and 1 on Alligator River. Of those 4 pens, 2 of them had pups this spring. The pairs that did not have pups, we released them last week. So they've been out on the landscape for about a week now. One was from Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge and one from Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. Both of those pens consisted of a wild female red wolf and a captive-born male. One of them was the female from St. Vincent and the North Carolina Zoo male, and the other one was a wild female that was actually fostered into a den 2 years ago as a like 11-day-old pup, and the male from Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium. The 2 pairs that are in acclimation pens that did have pups, we are going to wait and to release them from the acclimation pens until the pups are about 6 weeks old. So that will be approximately the end of May. Next slide. I'm going to go back one. Sorry. I wanted to mention that for these releases, sometimes there's this thought that it's a big media event with lots of fanfare and all that, but really what it is like the day or at least the morning prior to release, we go and remove the electric barriers and place some remote sensing cameras so that we can capture or we can get footage of them being released. And then at dusk on the planned day of release, one person walks up, opens the door, and then leaves. And so those red wolves can come out of that enclosure whenever they feel comfortable doing so, whether that's 2 minutes or 2 days. So that's basically how the releases go. Next slide. We track and monitor every newly released red wolf on a daily basis. Since we have the ability to change the programming on the GPS collars, when we first release them, we set it to get 1 point every day and to transmit that point to us every day. Now, if we did that over the life of the collar, the battery would die very quickly. But at least for like the first 30 days, we want to be able to track them since they're likely going to move around. Now, that point is supposed to come in at 8 o'clock every morning, but there's a lot of times it doesn't come in that early. So that 8 o'clock in the morning point, we may not get it till 8 at night. So if we don't get it first thing in the morning, then we're out there from the ground, like Ryan's doing this picture, trying to track those individuals to keep tabs on them. And as they do their transition to the wild, we strategically place supplemental food, rabbits, nutria, white-tailed deer, that kind of thing, to help the newly released red wolves with their transition into the wild. We also track all the other red wolves multiple times per week. And for new releases and their other ones, once they've been out there a while and seem to more establish themselves, the GPS collar is switched to take a point about every a little over every 2 days and transmit it to us. And it's not exactly every 2 days because we want to get points around the clock. So over time, you can get points for the various times of day and night of where they're active. We also monitor the population throughout the 5-county area with over 50 remote sensing cameras that we use to see their movements, who they're with, any health issues, and those types of things. If the newly released red wolves are in an area where area of concern, or if they're hanging close to roadways, then that type of thing, we take any opportunity we can to haze them, scare them off the roads, and try to make them more leery of people and vehicles and those types of things. Next slide. So after all of the releases of the animals that are currently still in acclimation pens, in conjunction with the releases we already did, and in conjunction with the birth of the litter, the population of known red wolves will increase to 19 known adult, subadult red wolves and 14 pups. And again, all the known subadults and adults will have orange collars, and of the 19, 12 of them will be the GPS collars. And with these additional releases in a couple of weeks, the estimated total wild population, if you include the pups, will be in the 35 to 37 red wolf range, which is a substantial increase over what we've seen in recent years. Next slide, please. This shows the age and sex class of the red wolves in the wild. The ones that are grayed are the ones that still remaining in pens. So once they're released, you see kind of the structure, and it's been an interesting shift because of the litter born last year and this year, and the litters in acclimation pens. There's been a strong shift from an older age class. We had 4 or 5 that were kind of past breeding age or on the brink of it last, and there's been a shift to a much younger population. Again, it shows 14 pups, but pup survival first year is generally about 50%. So although we prefer that all 14 of those pups survive, we'll have to see how that goes over the course of the next year. Monitoring to date indicates that there's no red wolf coyote hybrid litters in 2023. We tracked all known red wolf females extensively during the denning season to attempt to see if they localize and appear to be denning. And our tracking indicated that none of them had hybrid litters in 2023. I'll also point out that female up at the top, well, I'll get to her in a second, but there's that female is 14 years old, which is extremely old for a wild red wolf. And I'll show you on the next slide where she is on the distribution map. Next slide. So this gives you a general idea of where the wolf distribution is. You can see the upper right-hand corner on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, particularly with the release of the pair on West Milltail, and with the litter of pups and the 5 yearlings from last year, that there's a substantial number of red wolves up in that area. The Milltail pack with the foster and the litter is currently 13 members strong, which is rather large for a red wolf pack. And you would expect over time that some of those yearlings will likely disperse from that area. And then to the south of that is the gator female. That's the one that's the 14-year-old. That area she's in is the bombing range. And she has spent most of her life down there. She was born up in the Milltail area. And we would typically see her coming back up into the fields of the Milltail area for a week or so, and then go back down the bombing range for a month. But she hasn't come up in a while, and whether that's because of her advanced age or because of the strength of the Milltail pack up there, kind of keeping her out of there, we're not positive, but she hasn't been up there in a while that we've detected. And then a little further west is the northern female, a single female, and she uses a lot of. I'll show her distribution. And then the pungo to the far left shows 3 females and 1 male. That 1 male is the one that was released last week. The 3 females are wild females the 1 female that's in that area, and the 2 that were fostered in 2 years ago. So they're wild females as well. And then again, later this spring, we'll be releasing the breeding pair, a yearling female and 4 pups from an acclimation pen on Pocosin Lakes, and also from another acclimation pen, a wild female and male, and their 4 pups as well. Next slide. This just shows you the general distribution of the milltail pack. The blue dots are when we had the male's collar fixed to get a point every 13 hours. That's all of his points for the last year. So you can see he's got a pretty tight home range. They use mostly the open fields. They do a lot of rodent hunting. And their home range is about 10 to 15 square miles, which is actually a little bit smaller than what an average red wolf home range is. The yellow points are the female, but she does not have a GPS collar, so those points are strictly daytime points. The collars, the VHF collars and the GPS collars, the VHF function, typically when they're established in landscape, we have it turn off at nighttime to save battery life. And VH collars with those settings can last, 8+ years out there on the landscape. Again, with the VHF on the new releases, we leave that on 24 hours a day, so we're able to track them at nighttime if need be. Next slide. This is again the distribution of the wild female. Again, she's tied closely to farm fields and the adjacent forested areas, early successional forest habitat, both on and off refuge. And her home range is about 10 square miles. That's not a scientific home range. That's just basically the area that her points for the year covered. I should clarify that. Next slide. And again, this is a wild female out on Coast Lakes National Wildlife Refuge that I just showed generally. They're using open farm fields, both on refuge and off refuge and forested areas adjacent to those farm fields. Next slide. The adaptive management strategy was developed in the late 90s and implemented here in the year 2000 as a method of controlling interbreeding and hybridization. And it was based on research conducted locally in Eastern North Carolina to some degree, and it was subsequently determined to be effective based on research conducted locally here in Eastern North Carolina. It entails removing some coyotes upon capture and sterilizing and re-releasing other coyotes, and that's based on location, where they're captured in relation to where we have red wolf presence and where there is an established red wolf pack or where we're trying to establish red wolves and that type of thing. Coyotes that are sterilized and released act as placeholders in areas that currently don't have red wolves, and they'll keep out other coyotes, and their food needs are less because they don't have litters of pups. But if you leave them hormonally intact, meaning you don't just spay or neuter them, but you sterilize them, then they will continue to defend their territory and exclude other coyotes from moving in. Within established red wolf territories, there's a lower number of canids overall, and it's made up mostly and sometimes entirely of red wolves. In areas where there are no red wolves, you're going to have a higher density of total number of canids that's made up of coyotes, because they have smaller home range sizes. So a lot more coyotes can fit in the same area that a red wolf territory would cover. So they're at much higher densities. And with that much higher density, they also can have bigger impacts on prey because of their higher prey need. And they also have a more diverse prey range, I should say. They tend to take a few more birds than red wolves, and they have higher prey needs because they're higher densities. And a lot of the research in here and in other areas shows that if you remove a coyote from a landscape, 2 or 3 are going to take its place rather quickly. But if you can capture them and sterilize them and re-release them, then they'll hold that territory, keeps them from reproducing, and can locally reduce coyote numbers to some degree. Next slide. This capture season, like I said earlier, we captured 12 coyotes. 9 of those were euthanized based on the location where they were within and immediately adjacent to red wolves or where red wolves were present. 3 additional coyotes were sterilized, collared, and re-released back where they were captured to act as placeholders for hopefully potential future red wolf home ranges. So with those addition of 3, and we've had some mortality of sterilized coyotes, we currently have a total of 26 sterilized coyotes within the Eastern North Carolina population area. The sterilization is performed by Dr. Ford at the Chowan Animal Hospital. Next slide. Coyote sterilization is done at no cost to the landowners or to the Fish and Wildlife Service for the actual sterilization. And the Red Wolf Coalition pays for all of the coyote sterilizations. All the sterilized coyotes are radio collared and released back where they're captured. They now are we're putting white collars like the one in the upper picture we started that last year, and we're going to continue doing white collars so it'll be more visible and again help distinguish them from red wolves. But in the past, they were sterilized coyotes had black collars. So there's still quite a few of sterilized coyotes out on the landscape to have black collars. But over time, that will decrease, of course, and then we'll continue moving forward with white collars. But if you see an animal on the landscape with a black or white collar, that it is a sterilized coyote. And again, the research done here showed that it is an effective way to reduce interbreeding and can potentially reduce population locally. It can benefit land managers in their land management goals. You know, if they're looking to reduce coyote populations, this is one way that they can potentially do that. It can keep other coyotes from moving in. And of course, it benefits red wolf recovery in multiple ways. Next slide. I also want to mention that the Red Wolf Coalition developed a depredation compensation program. It's administered and funded by the Red Wolf Coalition, and it reimburses landowners for loss of livestock by red wolves. Now, there haven't been a lot of depredation of livestock and pets by red wolves over the course of the program. In fact, it's only occurred 9 times that's been documented. Most of the time when it's investigated, it ends up being some other type of incidents. Domestic dog is actually a lot of them, foxes, coyotes, those types of things. But it's still a concern for landowners in the area where the red wolves. So to help address that, the Red Wolf Coalition developed this program to hopefully be a valuable assurance to them that if their livestock is taken by red wolves, that they get reimbursed to hopefully increase tolerance and or support of the Red Wolf Recovery Program. And as part of the stipulation of that, you need to contact the Fish and Wildlife Service within 24 hours if you believe that you might have a red wolf depredation. Next slide. We also have a trapper reimbursement program. It's funded by the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. And the purpose of this is for trappers that are already out there trapping, for landowners or on their own land, they're a licensed trapper and they're legally trapping. If they happen to catch a red wolf or an animal they believe is a red wolf or a radio collared canid, regardless of what species it is, or a wild canid that might be of management value, like a coyote that could potentially be sterilized and re-released, if they contact us and turn that animal over to us, transfer it in live and in good condition, they can be reimbursed. And they need to contact the Fish and Wildlife Service as soon as possible after capture for all that to occur. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn over to Luke Lawless for a few moments to talk about the Pray for the Pack program.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Luke Lawless again. I'm the private lands biologist, so think of me as the habitat person as it relates to landowner engagement. I'm going to talk about the Pray for the Pack program that I oversee. And the Pray for the Pack program is funded by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's a voluntary cost share program for habitat improvement on private lands. It's a partnership between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, and private landowners who voluntarily sign up. The whole idea is that I meet with a landowner, I'll go out on their property, we'll see what their objectives are, what kind of management they're already implementing, and see how we can improve upon that to follow their, already their ideas and management goals and objectives that are already in place. The program really fits great as far as habitat goes because a lot of the landowners that I engage with are interested in managing and improving habitat for species such as deer, quail, turkey, bear, that kind of thing. And the habitat for that is great for the program and the landowner. So we're hoping it is really a win-win for both wolves and the landowner. And I'll meet with those landowners, as often as they want. I go out several visits. It's very thorough. It's not like I go out there one time and meet with them and then write something up. It's very customized and a joint effort between myself and the landowner. Those agreements, the projects, the habitat improvement projects can be funded up to 80%. It depends. There's 3 different cost share tiers that the landowner can choose based on their comfort level. If the landowner decides to sign up for the program, in exchange for the cost share for the habitat improvement, the landowner also agrees to allow red wolves to be present on their lands, allows some sort of monitoring based on their preference, and that goes to the different cost share tiers, and up to the landowner's comfort level to allow the use of the adaptive management plan on their land. So after that, I'm gonna turn it back over to Joe.
Hey, Joe,
You're on mute.
mute.
You're probably better off if I was, but I'm not now. I didn't catch this, Luke, but I want to let folks know we also have another part of this program that's a zero cost part of the Pray for the Pack. So if you're not looking for financial assistance, but you have land in the 5-county area and basically just want to say that you want to support red wolf recovery or allow red wolves on your property, you can sign up for that as well.
Yep, good point. Thanks, Joe.
Next slide. Regarding community engagement, Pray for the Pack is a big part of it, and Luke does a great job working with landowners. And like he says, he spends a lot of time trying to gear to what the landowner wants. That's the main point of Pray for the Pack. But another key point of our community engagement is the Red Wolf Center, located just outside Columbia, North Carolina. The front part of the building is the Red Wolf. It's got a little bit of an interpretation center, does outreach on Red Wolf stuff, and that's managed by Kat Ramos, of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. And then in the back part is for Red Wolf field team work, like collaring and health checks and those types of things. It's a key building for us. We also have 2 captive red wolves that are in a public enclosure that Kat and her programs take people back to see. And Kim Wheeler, who's a volunteer for Coastal Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, actually does the care and feeding of those red wolves and has been doing that for a long time. And we really appreciate the efforts of that as well. And North Carolina Wildlife Federation has live webcams on the red wolves that are in enclosures there. So you can go to their website listed here to see those live webcams. The building itself, I said this last night and I didn't do it between last night and tonight, but I really should have had a before and after picture, because this building was not the most attractive building in the world. And we wanted to beautify it, but we wanted to do it in a way that would fully involve the local community and help to build a sense of pride and ownership in this building and what it stands for, and potentially, help increase the tolerance or support of the Red Wolf Recovery Program. So we collaborated with Weiler Woods for Wildlife and Matt Willey, the muralist, and Kat Ramos from North Carolina Wildlife Refuge, from North Carolina Wildlife Federation to do this red wolf mural. And even though that picture makes it look like it's Photoshop, that is real in place, and it looks that good. We were very thrilled with how this turned out. It was a long road to get there, but it's been a really good thing for local community. The town of Columbia and the Terrell County have supported the effort. And there was a very long list of volunteers that worked a lot of hours on this building to get it to where it is. And there was a Prentice muralist that worked with Matt Willey to really make this come to life. And we're pretty proud of this building and feel like it has increased our ability in community engagement with the folks in that area. Next slide. Emily mentioned this in her talk, but we're going to try a pilot program this year called the Red Wolf Teacher Ambassador Program. It's a collaboration with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences and the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. And the goal is to have area teachers from local high schools. The 2 this year are local high schools, both science teachers. And they'll work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Red Wolf field team to help us monitor the population, both remote sensing cameras and doing radio telemetry for us. But they'll also conduct outreach on the National Wildlife Refuges in areas where we have high red wolf use and high public presence and interest in those red wolves. So they'll talk to folks about red wolves, and they'll have like pelts with them and those types of things, and conduct outreach ad hoc along the roads, along the refuge when and where needed. And they'll also help us to have the Red Wolf Center open more days a week so that we can bring more people through there. But the main part of that for these teachers is beyond helping us, which it will definitely be a help to us. It will give them a chance to be immersed in Red Wolf outreach and management with the Red Wolf Recovery Program, and they'll be able to take that valuable firsthand experience and knowledge back to their students and back to their classrooms and their fellow teachers, and really pay that information forward. And as part of it, they'll develop lesson plans that can be used by other teachers that are associated with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, and it will be made available to other teachers throughout the state of North Carolina and beyond. So we're looking forward to that program as well, and another way to engage with the community. Next slide. Ways that you can get involved, as I've mentioned multiple times, contact us directly if you have questions, issues, concerns related to red wolves. We are available to work with you to address any concerns you have and talk to you about your thoughts and feelings and issues or non-issues, support for the red wolves out on the landscape. Next slide. Another way you can help is to not shoot collared canids. As I've mentioned, it is illegal to shoot red wolves that have the orange collars, and it's likely to your benefit, especially depending on your land management goals, to not shoot the sterilized coyotes, which is the canids out there with wider black collars. Drive with caution in areas where there could be red wolves, which is pretty much throughout the 5 county areas. Of course, there's concentrated areas, but one could be anywhere, especially after releases. So drive with caution around the 5 county area, and engage in red wolf management efforts. Attend public meetings such as this one tonight. Provide comments and recovery plans. Participate in the whatever strategy and process, like Emily was talking about, to engage, to have the two-way conversation. Be part of that. That would be a great way to be involved. Next slide. And another great way to be involved, especially if you own habitat, or if you own habitat in this 5 county area, is to become a Pray for the Pack participant. You can receive funding and technical assistance from the Fish and Wildlife Service to work towards your land management goals. Next slide. And as I've mentioned, the Fish and Wildlife Service Red Wolf team is committed and available to work with you to address your questions, concerns, hear about your support and love for the species and all that. Here's the contact information for the folks that have talked tonight, and there's others. If Morgan or Ryan, then obviously that's your point of contact, then feel free to contact them with your comments, questions, concerns. And then one last slide, I believe. If you have questions after tonight's meeting that don't get answered, as I've been talking, I'm seeing a lot of questions coming to chat. We got a lot of questions in the pre-registration, so I know we're not going to be able to get through all of them tonight. But you can email questions to redwolf@fws.gov, and we will provide answers via email response and post it on the website. And as always, for additional information and updates, you can look at the Red Wolf Recovery Program website. It always has the latest information available to the public, and on our Facebook post or Facebook page, you'll see latest posts. And with that, I will turn it back over to Megan, I assume.
Yep. Thanks, Joe. And thank you everyone for those updates. We're going to go ahead and get started with the question and answer portion of tonight's meeting. So again, my name is Megan Stone with MC, and I'll be the moderator for the Q&A session tonight. Excuse me. The intent of this question and answer session is to first respond to questions that were submitted by participants upon registration that are within the scope and ability of the service to respond to tonight. If you submitted a question when registering for this meeting, there's no need to resubmit the question tonight. We have a list of these questions and we'll do our best to address these questions. Again, only questions within the scope and ability of the service will be responded to tonight. After we've worked our way through as many of these questions as we can, if we have time remaining, we'll move on to questions received via the Zoom chat feature to allow participants to submit follow-up questions to the services responses provided during the meeting tonight. If you would like to ask a question via the chat, you can see those instructions on the screen for how to do so. If you are joining by phone, you can see instructions on the right. You'll press *9 to raise your hand to let us know you have a question. We only have one phone caller on tonight, but again, that's *9 if you'd like to raise your hand. And we do that just because those joining by phone don't have access to the chat. All right, so we'll leave these instructions up on the screen. The service had much information to deliver and aim to be as thorough as possible tonight, and they are committed to getting questions answered in a timely fashion. So if not addressed tonight, for any of those questions, to the extent possible, the service will follow up and answers will be posted on the program website. So with that, we'll start with our first pre-registered question. Again, after we've worked our way through as many of these as we can, if we have time remaining, we'll move on to questions received via the Zoom chat feature to allow participants to submit follow-up questions. All right, our first question is, what are ways that the service can reduce the greater than 30% mortality rate over the past 2 years? And we'll turn that over to Joe.
So a lot of that was talked about at various points in the presentation, but I'll touch on some of the things that we've changed over the last couple of years to try to reduce mortality, the various causes of mortality, gunshot mortality and vehicle strike mortality specifically, I suppose. But the orange colors themselves is a key change that has that factors into that, and the orange reflective material on the collars has also helped ways to reduce mortality, and the outreach that goes along with that, so folks know what orange colors mean, and the highway signs along the roadways, so that they know red wolves are present, so they can do it. You know, their actions can hopefully lead to a decrease in mortalities. Pairing a captive-born male with a captive-born red wolf with a wild red wolf is expected to help them transition into the wild. We've left them in acclimation pens longer. I actually didn't address that on my one slide about the acclimation pens. We increased the period in acclimation pens this time across the board. Most of them were in there about 6 months, which is a couple of months longer than typical. Part of that was to allow for the potential for pups to be born, and part of that was to allow for an additional bonding period. The shortest one that was there was in acclimation pen was about 2.5 months, but that's because of the later date at which the female was captured from the wild. But that wild male that she was put with was in the acclimation pen and within the territory where she was where she was raised for 4 months prior to her being placed with him. So his presence was known. And again, just the fact that we left them in acclimation pens long enough to potentially have pups increases their chances of the pair remaining together in that remote area where the pen is, at least initially. We also reevaluated the factors of individuals for release, like I talked about in the slide, selecting individuals that had not been on public display, fed natural prey items, their age range and those types of things, the factors that tend to lead to higher likelihood of success. We're continuing to haze individuals off of roadways and in areas where they shouldn't be when opportunities present themselves, or through our monitoring, we find them in those areas, and that will help reduce rates of mortality. And there's a lot of ongoing research on vehicle strike mortality as a way to reduce it. I talked about them previously. We've got a road ecology study going, wildlife crossings, talking with folks about that. There's various non-governmental organizations looking into that as well to try to find ways to help reduce vehicle strike mortalities of red wolves and lots of other wildlife species as well.
Thank you, Joe. All right, moving on, our next pre-registered question is, how diverse are the genetics in the wild red wolves? Are they as imperiled as the Mexican gray wolf? And we'll turn that over to Emily.
Thanks, Megan. Sure, that's a Good question. So the latest number that I could find is from our 2016 PVA that showed that the Eastern North Carolina red wolf population had retained 85.4% of its founder genetic diversity. This upcoming PVA that we are working on will provide an updated estimate of that. The red wolf population, or the red wolf captive breeding program, started with 14 founders, of which 12 are still represented. The Mexican wolf program started with 7 founders. I don't have the current genetic diversity for the wild Mexican wolf program to really speak about how imperiled that is, but improving or maintaining gene diversity are key components of both the red wolf and Mexican wolf recovery programs and their plans to ensure long-term viability.
Thank you, Emily. All right, moving on. Our next question is, what will be happening beyond 2023? Will the wolves be moved to a more remote location for safety? And we'll turn that over to Joe.
So that second part of that question, if they're referring to the introduction of red wolves into a new area, that'll be addressed in a different question. But with respect to what's going to be happening beyond 2023, both here and in other areas, there's too many factors in play at this point to really know the specifics. We need to be adaptable to the situation on the landscape and in the captive population. But the red wolf recovery planning revision and the PVA, the population viability assessment, will help inform and guide those future actions, particularly other release areas. And well, it's possible that future for red wolves from Eastern North Carolina will be translocated to other populations to increase overall numbers and genetic diversity, similar to what we do from St. Vincent up to here. There's not, just in case this is what this question is getting at, there's not any plan to move the red wolf population from Eastern North Carolina to a different area. We're also continuing efforts to reduce causes of mortality here in Eastern North Carolina, like we've talked about on multiple fronts, including efforts to continue to foster acceptance of red wolves here in the local communities to allow conditions that are more conducive to their survival.
Thank you, Joe. We've got another one for you here. What can forest managers do to ensure the recovery of red wolves?
So in general, forest management practices that maintain a variety of different habitat types, early successional, some late successional habitats, or early successional with wooded blocks adjacent to them that can support a variety of different prey species for red wolves and provide denning and rearing habitat, particularly if there's adequate security, such as it being somewhat free of human disturbance during key times. That will greatly benefit the recovery of red wolves in those areas. For forest managers, providing information on red wolves and their use of the property to folks that may lease it for various reasons, it can greatly increase support, it helps support the red wolf recovery program. And if you're so inclined, a forest manager, then you may consider entering into land use agreements with the Fish and Wildlife Service to allow some additional monitoring and potential capture operations, those types of things that would further show support for the red wolf recovery program.
Thank you again for that response. All right, next question is, what is expected of those of us who love photographing the wildlife in Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge?
Yeah, and I'm sure that question is partially posed because of what's occurred over the last year on Alligator River, because there was a lot of pressure put on the pups in that pack from folks just want to be out there to love the red wolves, and there can be some detrimental effects to that with respect to habituation of the pups, which may not seem like an issue on the refuge, but we've seen in the past, and it's almost certain to happen this time, some or all of those pups born there will disperse off of the refuge and likely down south of the refuge onto private land, and they need to be as leery of people as they can in general on the refuge as well, and to help us do that, people out there on the refuge need to keep a minimum distance, a minimum of 100 yards away from red wolves. And that means maintaining that distance. If they're coming towards you, you continue to move yourself. So you maintain that 100 yards, and that will help, that in itself will help prevent habituating humans. Also, don't stay with an animal or animals throughout the entire day or for too long, as your presence, whether you sense it or not, can disrupt their normal animal behavior. And if they're looking at you, even if they're ways away, you're affecting their natural behavior to some degree. And if your presence is causing them to alter their movements or behavior, like they appear to want to go a certain route, but it's a great place for you to get, to see them. And it's not just photographers. This is specific to all of us out there trying to enjoy this species. But if your presence is causing them to have to alter those movements, then you need to move yourself, increase that distance and move to a different location. Never pursue the animal to get a closer look or a closer picture. Abide by road closures. There are currently temporary road closures on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge for the protection of this pack to help limit some of the concerns or some of the effects that we had last year on this year's litter. These have been put in place to protect these animals that we all love. So we need to abide by those, and don't do anything to attract red wolves or any wildlife in general, such as throwing out food or putting down lure or anything like that that would draw them closer to you.
Thank you, Joe. All right, we've got a two-part question here. How many red wolves do you plan to release over the next 5 years? Will there be an increase in release locations and frequency?
So this is similar to what we talked about before. The number that we're going to release over the next 5 years needs to factor in the existing condition on the ground, the existing condition in the captive population, to see what the needs on the ground are and what we have on the ground as it goes year by year. So it's too soon to say we're going to release this many red wolves over the next 5 years. Specific needs of the Eastern North Carolina population, it will be based on the population of what we have year to year. How many breeding pairs we have, how many territories we have where there aren't red wolves that we could potentially place them, and factors such as that. So there's not a set number. We need to be adaptive to what is occurring on the landscape as we move along. With respect to other release locations and frequency, that is all, as Emily described, that's all part of the red wolf recovery planning process, and the population viability assessment will help inform and guide that as we move through that process.
All right, and you've touched on the orange collars a little bit already in the presentation, but this question is, will collaring wolves help prevent them from being shot by hunters as coyotes?
Yeah, we can't touch on this too much. Orange collars with orange reflective material, along with the important outreach component of that, so that folks know what that means, is a key piece in letting people know it's a protected species to reduce the chances of misidentification. So they, as a coyote, and for it to be shot. So that orange collar is a key to look at, to look for, to know it's out there. And it's your due diligence, anybody that's going to do anything, to know what it is that you're shooting at or harming or whatever. And that orange collar is a key piece of being able to do that.
All right, next question is, where is red wolf likely to be encountered in the wild?
So there, you saw the distribution map that I put up earlier. There's red wolves throughout the 5 counties. Some of them move a lot. As these younger ones get a little older, they're going to start dispersing all over the place. So pretty much anywhere within the 5 county area, outside of developed areas, you could potentially see a red wolf. They're typically very elusive and secretive animals. But as we've talked about a little bit, the family group on Alligator River is seen by the public quite a bit.
All right, thank you, Joe. And our next question is, will the Department of Agriculture policies for forest management work the red wolf to ensure that their habitat is protected. And we'll turn that over to Emily.
Yeah. So Joe spoke a little bit about some forest management practices that could benefit red wolves. As far as the specific Department of Agriculture policies, I don't have enough information about those policies to be able to answer that question.
Thank you, Emily. All right, next question is, how many wolves can Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge alone support? And we'll turn that over to Joe.
There are so many variables and factors, and they're all changing over time that play into the answer to that question. So there's not one set number, but and it ebbs and flows depending on births and dispersals and deaths and habitat management and those type of things. But based on the habitats that we've seen red wolves use successfully over the life of the program and the way that the population numbers, both past and present, we would anticipate that Alligator River would likely potentially be able to support, say 20 to 25 red wolves, but that's a very general estimate of what we would expect.
Thank you, Joe. All right, this next question is asking if you can speak to federally recognized tribe support and outreach, and we'll turn that over to Emily.
Sure. So outreach to federally recognized tribes, I will say, has been somewhat limited. We did reach out to federally recognized tribes for participation on the recovery team, and I am happy that we have representation from the Cherokee Nation, the Upper Mattaponi tribe, and the Monacan Indian Nation. We also reached out to the federally recognized tribes within the historic range of the red wolf to review and comment on the draft recovery plan. We've worked with the Cherokee Nation in the past on grant opportunities involving the red wolf, and most recently, as I mentioned, the documentary. Like I said, tribal perspective is a piece of the red wolf story that has been missing. And while we're starting to get that piece in place and incorporating it into recovery, there's more to be done. So we will be working on that, having that tribal perspective represented on the team or in any kind of recovery planning process will just ensure that we're taking a more holistic approach, and it'll only enhance our recovery recommendations for the red wolf.
Thank you, Emily. We've got another question for you here. How are relations with community members in the 5-county radius being improved? Is there quantitative or qualitative data?
Sure. So Joe touched a little bit on things that are being done on the ground to improve those relations. Kind of a theme throughout this presentation is that we recognize that we can't recover the red wolf alone, and we're really trying to increase our focus on collaboration and community and partner engagement to recover this species. And we're working to provide landowners in North Carolina and other stakeholders by increasing engagement, communications, and transparency in all of our actions. For example, the draft recovery plan calls for increased formal participation of stakeholders in management and recovery planning processes. But again, what that looks like, we don't know. Francine's work is going to help us to develop that process, to give stakeholders a say in decisions that affect them, and the transformation of that conflict to collaboration and progress will improve community relations as well. We don't have data at this time. The service is planning an upcoming collaborative study to test communication and messaging approaches through which we are intending to seek community members' input. This study will help inform recommendations for future messaging related to red wolves, which will also help improve relations with the community.
Thank you, Emily. Next question is, what is being done to protect the red wolves from intrusive behavior of park visitors? And we'll turn that over to Joe.
So I touched on that a little bit, but just to reiterate some of the points, not this the whole list, but What's being done is refuge road closures to help protect that pack, especially during sensitive time periods, and enforcement of those closures. Also posted tips to follow to help us prevent habituation of wildlife to humans, and I ran through a lot of those tips earlier. And another component of that is the Red Wolf Teacher Ambassador Program to talk to folks directly, one-on-one or groups along the way out there on the refuge to help reduce or eliminate those types of behaviors out there.
Thank you, Joe. We've got another one for you. The question is, why can't you let coyotes and red wolves breed?
So we try to reduce the number of breeding events between coyotes and red wolves to limit the coyote gene introgression into the wild red wolf population, which has been shown through research conducted in Eastern North Carolina to be an effective way to manage the adverse effects of hybridization on the wild red wolf genome. Basically, it's a way to preserve the species.
Thank you. Next question is, are you considering better suited reintroduction sites with lower coyote density or less human traffic? And we'll turn that over to Emily.
Yeah, so we're definitely looking for additional sites. We know that's necessary for recovery. We'll use the PVA suitability studies that are already available and information from the draft recovery plan or the final recovery plan to assist in identifying those sites. But I think there might be a little bit of a misconception that there's a better place within the historic range of the red wolf. There are going to be few places that have lower coyote densities and smaller human populations or less traffic.
Thank you, Emily. Next question is, I would be interested to hear your thoughts on the release environment now versus the 90s, especially related to coyote density. And we'll turn that over to Joe.
Yeah, it's recognized now that the presence of coyotes is higher than it was when the original reintroductions occurred. However, management strategies such as the adaptive management strategy we've talked about were successful in growing the red wolf population, even in the presence of coyotes, and even as that coyote population was growing. The population viability assessment that's being done as part of the Red Wolf Recovery Plan revision is evaluating both the existing condition in Eastern North Carolina and red wolf habitat in general with respect to the presence of coyotes, modeling the different impacts that different types of management strategies or allowing all coyotes and those types of things will have on the population growth of red wolves in the future. So when that's completed, that will provide the best available science to help inform and guide the development of strategies to manage both red wolf and coyote populations.
Thank you, Joe. Next question is, what are penalties for killing a red wolf, either on one's private property or elsewhere? And we'll turn that to Emily.
Thanks. Yeah, so red wolves are a federally protected species under the Endangered Species Act. So killing or harming a red wolf can result in civil and or criminal penalties that may include fines or forfeiture of any property used in the crime.
Thank you, Emily. Next question is, do you anticipate adding more pups born under human care to the wild population in the next season/few years? And we'll turn that over to Joe.
Yeah, I mean, every year, as I've talked about, one of the key focuses is on the ability to pup foster. We see it as a key way to increase numbers and genetic diversity. So every year we will assess opportunities to pup foster and pursue those opportunities whenever they prove feasible. But it's not always feasible based on a variety of factors that, and I think I'm actually going to touch on it in a question later on. It's based on a variety of factors, including the presence of a wild litter within the wild population and the availability of captive-born pups that are of similar age as the wild litter, and to be able to access the wild den, and you have to be able to find it, more than once to be able to foster. So, but yes, we will pursue those opportunities whenever we're able to.
Thank you for that response. I might get this county name mispronounced, but the next question is, Is it possible that there are red wolf in Guilford County? We'll turn that over to Joe.
Yeah, I'll probably butcher as well. We have no current or past documented or confirmed evidence or reason to believe that there is the presence of red wolves in that county. It's substantially farther west than the current population. There's currently only one small population of red wolves, as we've discussed, here in the far eastern portion of North Carolina, consisting of Beaufort, Dare, Hyde, Terrell, and Washington counties. So I never say never, but it's very, very unlikely that there would be a red wolf in that county.
Thank you, Joe. Next question is, does the service plan on increasing staffing capabilities and budget to ensure the red wolf conservation efforts are successful? And we'll turn that over to Emily.
Yeah, so we continue to assess the needed staffing capacities to manage this very complex recovery program. So as funds become available and needs are identified, we hope to further staff the program.
Thank you, Emily. Next question is, realizing this is 2 years out, does the service plan to release potential mates for last year's litter? Can 2 packs share territory? And we'll turn that over to Joe.
Yeah, so as I've talked about in the presentation, as we're trying to establish more breeding pairs in the wild and therefore increase pup fostering opportunities, it will likely be a key part of that strategy to try to pair wild red wolves with captive red wolves to increase the number of breeding pairs, since there's such low population numbers in the wild currently, and their likelihood of finding a mate in the wild is lower. So yes, it is very likely that will be part of the release strategy in the future. It says 2 years out, but one of the females or 2 of the females that we paired with captive born males this year, they just turned 2 years old, including one of the ones that had pups in a pen. So it's actually it could be considered part of the strategy for next winter as well, like we did this winter. However, as we've been saying, any future releases will be dependent on a lot of conditions on the ground: red wolf presence, breeding number of pairs, territories available, suitable habitat conditions being available, those types of things, so that we'll continue to adapt to what's occurring on the ground. To answer the second part of the question, the size of a territory is based largely on prey availability. So while 2 different red wolf packs would be very unlikely to share a single territory, if the prey density is high enough, then potentially portions of an existing territory, it could in theory be split between 2 adjacent territories. Like they would occupy part of the same, it would become 2 territories, but they wouldn't be in the same territory, but one could potentially be split and they occupy part of that and adjacent, and this side of that and adjacent. So you wouldn't have 2 full wolf packs that literally use the same exact boundary. But if high prey density is high enough, they could potentially split off part of an existing territory, if that makes sense. But that's not typically what we'll see, especially in an area that has a well-established wolf pack.
Thank you, Joe. And we've got some more questions, but I did just want to answer one recurring question really quick. We've been asked if this recording will be shared. And it will. It'll be posted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website. So that usually happens within a few weeks because you need to make sure it's accessible for everyone. All right, with that, we'll move to the next question. How does the service plan to more aggressively counteract the prejudices and hatred of centuries of old world myths around wolves? And we'll turn that over to Emily.
Excuse me. Yeah, that's a good question. So all wolves have long been depicted as these ferocious, snarling evil animals. Think of the role that wolves play in stories and movies: Little Red Riding Hood, 3 Little Pigs, Frozen, Beauty and the Beast, and then all of the werewolf stories. This misinformation has done real damage by shaping the public's understanding of wolves and creating fear and hatred. So the recovery plan calls for conducting outreach and education on red wolf conservation to improve public awareness and tolerance of red wolves. What that exactly looks like, we will consult with stakeholders during the development of the implementation strategy to determine specific actions that are necessary.
Thank you, Emily. Next question is also for you. Are there plans to hand the recovery program over to state of North Carolina agencies?
So if the species, the red wolf species, not just the Eastern North Carolina population, were recovered to the point that it was no longer warranted listing as threatened or endangered under the ESA, then management would return to the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission and other state agencies with red wolf populations. But until then, the service will keep working collaboratively with state agencies to manage recovery of red wolves.
Thank you, Emily. All right, our next question is, can the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service ask the North Carolina Department of Transportation to implement and enforce a 40-mile-per-hour speed limit on US 64 through Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge as a stopgap measure? And we'll turn that over to Joe.
So as I've mentioned throughout the presentation in various spots, the service has ongoing conversations with the North Carolina Department of Transportation and others regarding ways to reduce vehicle strike mortality. And the service currently has a contract with Western Transportation Institute, who's conducting a red wolf road ecology study to help form and guide future actions and ways to reduce mortalities. And as part of that study, those researchers are meeting with Department of Transportation to discuss various options, including but not limited to wildlife crossings, underpasses, reducing speed limits, fencing, and those types of things. When those researchers have spoken to us on the very general terms on speed limits, not specific to Highway 64 or even specific to North Carolina, they've indicated that traffic research, based on traffic research, that speed limit reductions below the speed that a particular stretch of highway is designed for, which is 55 miles per hour in the case of Highway 64 and the stretch that's being referred to, have not been shown to be effective, and even with active enforcement. So basically, if the road can handle a higher speed based on the curvature and the pavement and the width, then regardless of what the posted speed limit is, folks will drive at whatever speed the road can handle. Anyway, I'll leave it there. But it should be noted that for anybody coming to visit or people that know, that stretch of Highway 64 through Alligator River has a substantial amount of speed law enforcement. I'm not sure I've ever seen a stretch of road that had as much law enforcement checking speed as that stretch does, which obviously I am extremely grateful for from a red wolf standpoint.
Thank you, Joe. Next question is, can you talk about the fostering of the one pup and how that works and why that was done? Have the parents accepted that pup? And we'll turn that over to Joe.
Yeah, I'll kind of go more into depth of the pup fostering and what it entails, because I just kind of touched on it in the thing. And as I've said, pup fostering is shown to be a highly successful method of increasing the numbers of a wild population and the genetic diversity. It was designed as part of the red wolf recovery program. You know, the old tales used to be that if you touched a red wolf, it would be, it would be abandoned by its parents because it smelled or had been, had humans. But that's not the case, and that was developed with the red wolf recovery program and the captive population testing, fostering, and it was seen that it could be a key way to increase the population and genetic diversity. And it's a method that we use to add one or more pups into the litter of hopefully an experienced red wolf breeding pair that have proven parental skills, which defines the milltail pair to a T. They had 6 pups last year. That was her first litter. And that's a lot of pups for a first-year mom, and yet 5 of the 6 survived. And even the one that didn't survive wasn't because of some lack of mothering skills. It was a vehicle strike mortality, unfortunately, on Highway 264. But so pup fostering works when we use radio telemetry, we have females radio collared, and we track them obviously multiple times a week under general terms. But starting in early April or even in late March, we'll start getting daily points on all females. And once they localize to a specific spot, which is not normal, of course, they're wide-ranging animals, then that's an indication enough that they have likely denned and have either given birth that day or the next day. And then prior to that, or when we start seeing her localizing, then we start coordination with the Red Wolf Safe folks, with the Red Wolves under human care, to see if there's been if the birth of the wild litter closely corresponds with the birth of one of the captive litters. And if there's a good match, then the pup fostering is initiated. And this is after we've gone in the wild den to confirm there is a wild den, see how many the number of pups there are, the sex ratio of those pups. And so if there's a good match with the captive population, then we initiate the pup fostering. And then we decide how many individuals and what sex of individuals to bring. The decision to bring one pup, well, there's only one litter in the captive population at that point that corresponded closely enough in birth to the age of the wild litter. You can't put pups that are of big age discrepancies together, because then they can potentially outcompete. So you want them to be within 2 to 3 days age-wise. So it was determined that we would do one because she already has 5 litters and there's still 5 yearlings in that area. And we didn't want to overstretch the breeding pair or the resources of that area. And we chose to bring one male pup because it would even out the sex ratio of the pups in the litter. And that one pup in that one litter born that had the right timing, ended up to be Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, which quite literally could not be any more farther away. It is the farthest away facility. But the folks from Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium actually brought that pup on a commercial airline flight directly into Raleigh, and we picked them up, and they went with us, and we placed that pup into the wild den. We want to foster them when they're within 10 to 14 day range, because that's when the mother's maternal instinct is very strong. And and also the pups have limited mobility at that age, so they're more likely to be able to stay in the den. Their eyes aren't open. They don't have enough movement yet, so that they can wander off from the den before the female returns to nurse them. But things have to happen pretty quickly, so that none of the pups are away from their mother for a very long time. The pup that was brought here from Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium was tube fed a couple of times on the way over to make sure that they were still safely fed and all of that. And then when we place them in the den, we rub the foster pup and actually get one of the wild pups to pee on the foster pup to help mask the scent a bit and kind of make them all blend together. Before we put them in the den, we put a microchip in them so that we can identify them later on. And after we did that very quickly. The fostering, we were probably at the den maybe 5 minutes, maybe a little over, and then we were out of there. And so these pups that are fostered in before they're even 2 weeks old, they grow up learning to behave like a wild red wolf from their adoptive mother and their adoptive parents and siblings. It's shown to have basically the same survival rates as wild born pups. Since the placement of that pup, all monitoring has indicated the female was back in there. We actually tracked her, watched her from about, probably a half-mile away. And she went back to that den shortly I was fostered and has remained in that den. So if all indications are that pup was successfully fostered into that den.
Thank you, Joe. We've only got a few more minutes left here, so we're going to try and answer this last pre-registered question. The question is, why do we not want to rebalance nature?
So the Red Wolf Recovery Program is an example of doing just that, of attempting to restore the balance in nature. Red wolves are considered apex species, and within their home range, broadly defined as the southeastern United States, they help maintain the balance of ecosystems that evolved with their presence. They help remove old and sick animals, and they help maintain healthy populations of smaller predators like raccoons, and the effect that increasing populations of raccoons could have on other species like quail and other species in turn. Which in turn reduces the impacts on other species from smaller predators. The absence of red wolves throughout their historic range has also allowed for the expansion range of species such as coyotes, which likely wouldn't have occurred, or certainly not to the degree that it did, if there was a healthy red wolf population throughout the historic range. So just reiterating what I said, the red wolf cobra is a good example of attempting to restore the balance of nature.
Thank you, Joe. All right, we're getting close to 8 p.m. Eastern time. So we've gotten through all of those pre-registered questions, and we've recorded all of the live questions that we've got. So we've got those all written down, and those can be followed up with later on. So with that, I'll turn it over to John Turpak to close us out.
Thank you, Megan. And I want to thank everybody for your interest, attention, and curiosity during this session. I realize the limits of this platform for fostering robust discussion, and I appreciate your patience with our efforts to engage as many of the public as possible. You all have incredibly busy lives, so taking the time to join this webinar, listen, and ask questions means so much to us and to red wolf recovery in general. Conservation does not happen without people. Whether you cheer on the red wolves from across the country, or you're managing your land in eastern North Carolina in a way that supports these canids and their prey species, you are all important and critical for this effort. Thank you. We look forward to continuing to work to be better partners with you in the recovery of red wolves while we ensure and engage the needs and values of the people involved. Thank you again, and have a wonderful evening.